Good day, good evening, good night, and good afternoon, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Real Tennis Podcast. This is not about Harry Potter, so don't worry, the back cauldron will be coming out soon nonetheless. But this is strictly about the world of sports, world of tennis, and we have a special guest with us today. But before I introduce our special guest, let me introduce my co-hostesses with the mostesses and see whether they're still alive and doing well, particularly the one who's been MIA, claiming she doesn't read Harry Potter, though she has good reason to read it. Thank you, JK. Andreen from Solely Tennis Travel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing very well, actually.
I can hear that smirk in your voice. These bitches are
I'm,
reading that awful book series.
I don't.
I
I'm
knew it was
happy.
so good.
I know. I'm happy to say I read one book and thought, absolutely not. Thank you very much. I'm bouncing.
No, she's just like, I am vindicated.
Yes. No, not at all. It's good to be back. It's good to be back talking sports with y'all.
Yes. And Janina, well, I see you all the time, Janina. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for, minimizing me.
Okay, well, let me do that over again. Janina from Foreign, Ohio. How are you doing, Janina? How is it going? Have they
Everything is
abolished the
fine.
need for a passport to just leave the county?
Not quite, but almost. We're working on it.
Okay.
We have more pressing matters at the moment.
In Ohio?
Mm-hmm.
Really? I
Zip it.
wonder. And of course, there is Reels right here. But, I am hardly worth mentioning. We have a special guest with us today, like I mentioned at the top. We have Howard Bryant is here with us to discuss all things sports and culture and, of course, race. So let me not try to, we can talk about the fact that Howard is on Weekend Edition on NPR. He has books. He's popular on Twitter. We see him sometime on ESPN, if I'm not mistaken. He follows tennis and baseball religiously. But, Howard can tell us more about himself. Need I get wrong? And he just like, no, that's not me. You're confusing me with another black person. That's all. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. And I am thankful for being on this podcast because every time I listen to it, I realize it's the same thing. 2 points. Number one, this is the laughingest of laughing podcasts. Y'all laugh more than any podcast, all the podcasts combined. I'm like, they have fun. I like that podcast.
We
They
genuinely
actually
like
enjoy
each other.
themselves.
That's what it is. That's the secret. We
Mhm.
genuinely like each other. This isn't Hoda and what's Kathy Lee. This is that kind of thing. We don't do that here.
Right? And point number two is that I was like, I know I'm gonna never go on that podcast because I would be going into hostile territory because this is a Rafael Nadal house. And I was like, they ain't never gonna call me to come on the podcast. We got Babolat rackets in this house. We got
Cut it out.
hats. My son is a Nadal dude, and of course I was like, they won't ever call me. So be kind, kinda. Right?
Now here I'm questioning your parenting skills. We're not here to discuss that. So
Lucky
you.
you.
Forgive it.
I love that. This is the Federer. Yes, it is the
Right?
Federer.
Well, I would say that my best friend is a Nadal fan, so I know how to negotiate with enemies. So you're
Right.
safe.
Well, though, I gotta say though, I've been thinking about that border war. When you look at the last couple of Laver Cups and stuff, they want that crushed, right? It's like, no, we family, everybody, okay, we fam now. All the battles are over, all the rivalries over now. It's like they're like frenemies now. So every time I watch it, like you watch Nadal jump into Federer's arms after that doubles match, and I'm like, how are the partisans dealing with this right now?
There's a common enemy, Johnny.
Exactly.
So,
That's exactly right.
and
Oh,
Jack
man.
Sock. So
Well,
the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So
Well,
we're
That's
good
right.
with that.
That's right.
And the truth is, obviously, we would not invite you on unless the world was ending.
Right.
And so apparently the world is ending for quite a lot of people. And so-
Just so you know, if the world wasn't collapsing, we wouldn't have called you.
Okay, good to know. I know. I want you all to know this, that we are acknowledging that the world is ending, and this is why we have to have this fabulous podcast with Howard, because Howard has been sussing out the world particularly the world of sports and all the things that it means for the world to end when athletes protest.
So with that being said, just for you Nole fans who I know listen all the time, it has to be the second coming of Christ in the new world when we will bring you on the podcast. Just so you know, just so we're clear, okay? The world is ending, the dollar can get on. The second coming in the new world, that's when you can come on.
I will say I have a couple of Nole people who send me DMs when things get too tough. Why are they doing this to him? I'm like, oh no, why are you DMing me? Why are they doing this to him?
Did you get the child?
You know, at least he didn't say he was drinking bleach. What's he doing?
I know. Oof, gosh, that's brutal.
They're out of control.
He's the Detroit Pistons. What you gonna do? You know, he is the Detroit. He ruined Bird and Magic. He's the Detroit Pistons. He's Isaiah Thomas. He's never getting the love that he's supposed
never.
To.
And I'm fine with that.
Happen.
I am 100% fine with that.
That bodes well for our Olympic hopes as well. So, Howard,
yeah,
we are happy to talk to you about the world ending right now because it has been a flame, I'd say, for the last couple weeks. And we want to just talk to you a little bit about sort of the protests, George Floyd and Colin Kaepernick, which I now feel as if has come in center, right, for sports, right? That is the person that we have to sort of use as a reflection point for this moment. Talk to us a little bit about sort of how you perceive this moment from a sports.
Well, I'm thinking about renaming Colin. I'm thinking about just calling him Obi-Wan from now on, because I mean it really is true when you think about it. You know, if you strike me down, I shall grow more powerful than you can possibly imagine, right? I mean, the number of people over the last few years, and I will be candid and say, the number of people in our business who are making the decisions, who control the camera and control the pens and control what we see and what we hear, who privately are like, okay, well, let's all collude together to not talk about Colin Kaepernick. And this is actually black people in the business too, who are tired of Colin Kaepernick, who have said, you know what, if we don't write about him or if we don't talk about him, he'll just go away. But guess what? He's not going anywhere. He hasn't thrown a football since January 1st, 2017, and he's still at the center of the culture. And the reason he's at the center of the culture is because he's really been the only person over the past 3.5 years involved in this who has stuck to one thing, and that is the truth about where black people are in this country. And, you know, in that business. And everybody else has been trying to find some way to play both sides. And we're certainly seeing that right now, where all of a sudden everybody cares about black lives. And you see it especially with the NFL of all places, where here's a business that constructed its entire business model on destroying Colin Kaepernick, on propping up police, and on telling you as that black lives didn't matter because they spent all of their time pandering to white fans. And all of a sudden now you see the commissioner, Roger Goodell, out there on Friday looking in a camera telling you that black lives matter to the National Football League.
But never once mentioned Colin Kaepernick.
But never once mentioning Colin Kaepernick's name. And also never once mentioning not just police brutality, which he did. He mentioned our sympathies and hearts go out to the victims of police brutality, but also not saying it's unacceptable and it's going to affect our relationship with them. So once again, it's like, you know, sorry that you had to attend a funeral, you know, but this is how it is. And so Kaepernick to me is the guy who's in the center of all of this, who was true. And as we keep seeing, you can't, you know, people want that. People want to see somebody who's willing to stand up.
You have worked with him throughout this. You followed it closely. So you just said that people in the industry, including black people, were just tired of him. Are they just tired of having to face the truth? What does that mean? They're tired of...
Especially black people.
Why? That makes no sense.
I think what it is that, you know, when I was working on my book, The Heritage, a couple years ago, one of the points that just kept coming out of it, and it came out in the new book I did, Full Dissidence, in January. There's a chapter in that book called The Worst Thing in the World, and it's all about Black people having to navigate this world of whiteness. And there's this thing, in our business, I don't even think it's necessarily, the pressure usually comes from the underclass. They're the ones who always get it the worst. The least amount of money you have, the worse you have it in the country. But in this episode, in this sort of area, you see that sort of anti-Black pressure coming from the Black people who have the most in the business, because they're constantly trying to accommodate. They're constantly trying to figure out, how to keep their jobs in, being the only Black person in the newsroom or being the only Black person in the boardroom or whatever. And so that attitude that I've sensed when it came to dealing with Kaepernick was this idea that he's messing it up for the rest of us, and that he needed to kneel. He needed, metaphorically, kneel in the other direction. He needed to relent. He needed to say he was sorry. And I would always say sorry for what? What did he do that he would be apologizing for? And that he was the problem. People view him, who are in the business, they view, especially, not to cut my own self off, but especially during that tryout he had in Atlanta, right? The number of brothers who got mad because he had a Kunta Kinte shirt on. They're like, why is he poking the bear? They're trying to give him an opportunity. He's not serious, that they're looking at him like, okay, he's the problem here. And that at some level, if you're going to be in a corporate environment, there's a certain level of submission that you have to engage in. And because he's not willing to do that, they get mad at him.
So you're speaking specifically about Black people with quote unquote some level of privilege
and power. Yeah.
And power.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
which in some way is an illusory power, right? Because that's what they're admitting in even their challenge and with Kaepernick, is that they are admitting that in order for them to participate in this space, they have to deal with kind of what the tension that Martin Luther King says, right? You're getting peace, but it's not one that's coming from justice.
Yes, absolutely. It always reminds me of that Richard Pryor routine where he does the I Spy Cops about how the Black cops got to beat up more Negroes to keep his job, Yeah. And it's that type of thing in a lot of ways. That you're absolutely right that this can get taken all away. Why are you messing it up for everybody?
But I imagine that they think that there is some within that space, right? Because I don't want it to be confused, but at least I don't think this is what you're saying, but I don't imagine that they are the problem, right? They might be part of the problem, that the Black journalists per se, because they're operating within a larger white dominant culture power structure that wishes not for people like Colin Kaepernick to upset status quo. But I'm curious that if you, in your interaction with these journalists who are making this, comment, Colin should just relent, do they envision a space or a time, perhaps, or a plan where things can be better or much more equal, or they just imagine that they're only hoping to operate within this system? They have given up themselves to capitalism and being like, capitalism is the way. We just have to try to get a seat at the table.
Yeah, I think it's that real. I think it's the latter. I think it's that this is what it is. This is how it works, and you're not going to overthrow the system. You're not going to overturn it. It's not going anywhere. So you better learn how to navigate what's in it, and what's in it is money. You'll have your job. You'll get compensated, but don't expect to be more than one name on the masthead or one or two people in the room. The rest of that stuff's not going to happen. And I think that what ends up happening when you take that attitude is it's a self-protection to a lot of degree, but I think it's also something else. It's sort of almost a surrender, the recognition that this is as good as it's going to get.
So do you think that Colin Kaepernick misunderstood what he was doing in terms of the space that he was working in, or was he knowingly going to protest that, knowing that he's screwing up his brand and that all of this could go away? Or did he really think
or now?
At the beginning?
It's a good question. I think at the beginning, did anybody know it was going to come off the way that it did? I've asked him this several times, and most times he'll say, yeah, I knew the risk. I mean, did you know, you knew they were going to come at you? Did you know they were going to take everything? And he said he knew that. And I remember immediately when this happened, there had been conversations. Immediately the conversation was, can we suspend him? Like, suspend him for what? I mean, so immediately the entire framework of Kaepernick had been punishment. It wasn't understanding. It wasn't, well, you know, he's going to do what he does, but it's within the bylaws of the NFL. Because it was. I mean, there were no rules against this. The NBA has a specific rule that you have to stand for the national anthem. The NFL didn't. And so even within that framework, even though he was within his rights to do everything he did, the immediate reaction was, what level can we punish him? And so he knew something was going to come down. Did he think that they were going to shut him down for the rest of his life? I still don't think so. However,
I find
then the
that.
next. I'm sorry, Rose, go ahead.
No, I was about to say. No, you finish your thought, and then I will add my bit.
I was thinking then the next summer when he and I were in New York, I was asking him, well, now that we know, and this was right around the time where there had been talks about whether or not he was going to sign with Baltimore, whether Seattle was going to look at him. This was in the summer of 2017. Now that you know that they're willing to cut everything off, do you feel like you need to adjust? And his attitude was, no, I don't. I think he recognized by that point he had gone down this road, and if he apologized or if maybe I should have handled this a different way, it just wasn't going to work. How do you say, I'm sorry for being right, or I'm sorry for standing up? And this is that framework of the enormous punishment of blackness that you get when you advocate for black people. These industries, especially the sports industry, has made it very, very clear what they'll do to you. I mean, there's an argument you could clearly make that if he had said in 2017, yeah, I apologize for anybody who was offended. I didn't recognize that the flag was so important in this way. I'm going to protest a different way. Maybe he's in the league. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what? That's a fair question though, because I think sorry, Rails. There's this moment where there seems to have been an opportunity for him to have a compromise, right? In terms of what Jay-Z supposedly offered and entered into the space, like I'm an away point between you and Kaepernick, right? And then also people perceiving that Kaepernick having settled for an undisclosed amount was an admission of something. How do you perceive those two things?
Yeah, I'll be quick on that, and then I know Reels has been trying to get in three times on this.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I was going to say that, there was definitely a compromise point. But what are you compromising, right? I mean, if you are a human being and you're looking in the mirror and you know you are correct, what are you saying sorry for? I think that was Colin's big thing. Apologize for what? And then people would make the argument, well, y'all let Michael Vick in. Michael Vick was killing animals. Oh, well, y'all let, y'all let Leonard Little back in. Leonard Little killed somebody. And Colin was very offended, and rightfully so. Why are you putting me in that category? And I think those conversations, especially when they came from his own union, just kept hardening and hardening his resolve, where he was like, you know what? I ain't compromising at all. You will take me as I am, or you will not take me.
But I mean, I have to say that, one thing I have been impressed by Colin Kaepernick, anytime he spoke or anytime he did not speak, is the fact that he was grounded in scholarship and history. He did the reading because historically he had to have known by any measure, even on a micro level, that even if we're not even talking about sports league, like if you think, for example, Muhammad Ali, if you go beyond like Voting Rights Act, like and Fannie Lou Hamer, when she decided to register to vote, the man who owned the plantation, and it was a plantation, told her, you need to go withdraw your name for registering to vote. And maybe, and even if you remove your name, I can't even guarantee that I would let you stay on the plantation. You
That's
need
right.
to get your stuff and leave immediately. That
That's right.
nothing is guaranteed for you. One, because I think he understood, because with Michael Vick and Leonard, they were trying to, they had an incident. What Colin Kaepernick was asking the league or asking the world to do was move philosophically
That's
to
right. It's an
change status
ideology.
quo, an ideology. They were not going to let, he's not going to be allowed, because at this point, it is beyond, it is political, it is personal. You do not get and affront the white system like this at all. No
No, you
one,
don't.
very few, has ever bucked this trend in this manner and been able to go back to wherever they were. They never get back their position. They're never allowed to thrive within that previous institution. You gotta go
Well,
and find your own place.
that's
It
right.
just
And that is the reason, and that is 100% right, the reason why people love Muhammad so much, because he's the only one to do it. He's like, no, y'all took 3.5 years from me, and he became champion again. He got it back. He got to be made whole. Nobody else gets to be made whole. And even in being made whole, he still lost those 3 years to the point where people go, imagine what he would have been if you hadn't taken those 3 years from him. 100%. And I think that, like, even when people talking about the settlement, there were people who were like, oh man, he's got to donate that money to charity. Like that his admission taking the money somehow undermined the movement. I was like, no, those were back wages. That money is his. I didn't see that as him admitting. I mean, maybe I thought it was an admission that the NFL, when they settled with him, that they knew they were colluding against him.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that when he accepted the settlement money, that was some sort of sellout on his part, even though I know he was criticized for that. I thought that was way out of bounds. I didn't think that was fair at all.
So why do you think that athletes, well, look at LeBron James. He speaks out often. He doesn't get this pushback. Why is he able to do this?
Because he's the best player in the world. I mean,
Is that just
a few reasons. I think sometimes, I mean, let's face it, if Colin Kaepernick does this in 2013 when he's a Super Bowl quarterback, do you just throw him in the garbage? Now, this is a talent game, too. It was easier to do this to him because he was in a vulnerable position. He was in a disadvantageous position. LeBron James has never been in a disadvantageous position on this subject in his career. Let's also remember that LeBron didn't speak out on any sort of political issue until 2012, until Trayvon.
Right.
He'd already been in the league 10 years. That was his 10th season. So he was already legend. He'd already been in the finals twice. And so, it's not like he was in a spot where he was vulnerable.
he's not a rookie.
And he's also signed a $90 million shoe contract before he even made his first basket. So he has been very well insulated from everything that we're talking about. It's not to undermine what he did and to say that makes it less important, but it does say that when you've got that level of power, and you've got that level of influence, and you've got that level, I mean, who's going to cut LeBron James?
Right.
I mean, what LeBron James, what does LeBron James have to do right now for the league to say, yeah, we don't need you anymore?
Right. And if they do, he's
President.
fine. He's
Run
fine.
for president. I bet you that's it. Run for president.
Yeah, I know. So that actually, I mean, that actually leads us into a really interesting space that we wanted to explore with you, which is like, what can athletes who are perceived as at their best, or as you suggested, even with Kaepernick, vulnerable, do they have space for protests?
Well, I think that's the flip side of the coin that I keep trying to concentrate on, which is why is the sanction so damn high? Why is this the structure in the first place, right? We talk about sports being a meritocracy. We talk about people using their voice, and especially when you talk about money, black athletes are the only people in the world, in the American world at least, where when you have money, people want to hear less from you. The more money you have, the more people want to hear from you. I mean, why are we talking about Mark Cuban or Oprah or whomever being a presidential candidate? Because they're rich. But when it comes to black athletes with money, it's like, oh, well, what's going to be the price if you talk? And so I've always sort of wrestled with why is this the structure? And obviously the reason is that, it's a lie. It's a racist ass game. It's always been that way. But because the players make so much money, I think we overestimate the value of money in this regard.
But I think we're also we're underestimating that money in of itself, because Oprah and Mark Cuban, right? They make their money. That money is
Yes,
there for an athlete. If LeBron is signed, if making $90 million for Nike, Nike is obviously making 5, 6 times that amount that they're
that's right.
paying him, because $90 million is a salary. So as much
Yes,
as
it's
a
difference
big,
between earning and being in between
right,
earning and receiving.
and receiving, right? Because
Hmm.
he's not, because LeBron isn't Nike, nor was Michael Jordan. They're a big marketing factor, but at the end of the day, Nike is still making the lion's shares of the money. So that is why there is a, because that $90 million is a gambler, is a wager, right? What is the
That's right.
least, we have to think of that money as the least amount X companies think that they can pay in order
Hmm.
to make the profit margin that I can pay one person. But there's a
That's right.
million other people that they still have to pay, and et cetera, et cetera. So I always find that people sort of look at, oh, he got $90 million. He didn't get Nike. Nike didn't
That's
hand
right.
over the keys to LeBron. Not Michael Jordan. That's
See,
a
you
salary.
sound like Craig Hodges. Craig Hodges was saying to Michael Jordan in 1991, "Become Nike. You're Michael Jordan now. Believe me, if you compete with Nike." And Michael's like, "Yeah, no, that's not
I
gonna
read
work."
his book. Yeah, Craig Hodges and I are on the same page, and about how we feel about Michael too. Hey, that's another podcast.
Well,
That's
I will
another
tell you.
podcast
Well,
altogether.
I will tell you can make it a little bit this one. I will tell you right now. I have had a 4,200 word opus that's been sitting on the runway. I'm waiting for ESPN to actually run it on The Last Dance.
Yep.
And I talked to Mike Tolan, the executive producer of the documentary, and I said to him, I was like, "Hey, Mike, I got two questions for you. Really, I mean, we can talk about more, but I really do have two questions for you. Number one, who made the decision that there were going to be essentially no wives and no girlfriends of any player in there except Carmen Electra? And where was Craig Hodges?"
Mhm.
And he said that we decided that when we were constructing the documentary, we had to make a decision as to whether this was going to be a workplace documentary or a domestic documentary. We decided it was a domestic documentary, and we concluded that the wives and that the women in the story did not advance it. I was like,
Wow.
damn,
Oof. Oof.
ouch. Right?
Wow.
I tell that to the wives watching the babies or doing their own job. So
I was gonna, and I, exactly. I'm like, so you're gonna tell
Unholding the
me
secret.
that you're gonna tell exactly. So you're gonna tell me that Juanita Jordan had nothing to add after her husband comes home after Bill Laimbeer was beating on him for 7 games? You don't think she has a little some insight to this? I didn't love that. I thought that was a big hole in the doc. And then when it came to Hodges, Mike just said to me, we had a list of 105 people, including Michael. We interviewed 106 people for this documentary. The list was 3 times that. And, we just didn't get it done with Craig. It just sort of slipped through the cracks.
Craig didn't make the list? Because he didn't
And,
want to
no,
talk
they
about
said-
that
they said-
magnitude of Michael Jordan.
now
You
you're
gotta
they
talk to
talking
said-
about
Craig.
how the list is constructed, right?
Well,
I mean-
they said Craig made the list, but they didn't get to him. And I was like,
That's
that-
awful.
that doesn't really work for me.
Listen to me. If you ask me, you needed to talk to Craig before you talk to Scotty. Just saying.
Mhm.
Just saying. Because we know what Scotty was going to say. We know what Scotty will say. What would have made great theater was what Craig would have said. But
Mhm.
but he has a
Mhm.
book out, folks. You can read that book, and no one has said the book is a
Give the,
lie.
give the context of who Craig is, please, for folks who may not be regular.
Oh, so
We're talking-
Craig Hodges was I'm sure Howard probably would add more to it. I'm let me go do a little research to find the name of his book exactly. So he was
That's
on
long shot.
Long Shot. He was literally on the Bulls when Michael Jordan was being Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan basically got rid of Hodges because Hodges decided that he wanted to have a much more active and politically stronger political union, and felt that the players who are making up, particularly black and brown players who are making up the entire league, should have had more say in the politics.
Yeah.
But
Craig was a
he
big,
made it
yeah,
very
exactly.
he made it
Craig
very
was a
clear
big-
that Michael was a company man, and
Yeah.
Michael was one of those company men. Let me put it this way: Michael was being a Karen. You know that Karen who just would go to HR and won't tell you. that she would pretend that she would go to HR, file a complaint, and come and sit down and be like, "Oh, okay."
but it is.
So
it is
Craig,
a,
I was
it's a good
I was going to
character.
add one other thing on Craig. He was a big union guy, but also what he really was in the late 90s, late 80s, early 90s. He was starting to see, especially after New York and Bensonhurst and Howard Beach and all that stuff, that black people needed some advocacy. And when when the Bulls won the championship in '91, he went to the White House wearing a dashiki, and everybody lost it. They were like, "What you doing?" And he wore a dashiki, and he, in addition to talking to Michael, because '91 was when they won the championship. It was right after Rodney King was beaten.
Yep.
Asked Michael to get involved. Michael wouldn't get involved, and on top of that, he went to the White House and he handed George Bush a letter saying you need to be more responsive to black people, and the Bulls took that as an insult to the White House, and he never played again after the next season.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, thereby showing Colin Kaepernick the pathway that was going to be for him.
Exactly, that's what's going to happen to you.
Extended beyond, according to Craig, it extended beyond him. He and that guy, oh my God, he plays on the Golden State now. Steph Curry.
Steph Curry.
He and Steph Curry father, his son and Steph Curry are around the same age. And they basically blocked his son from even getting a shot at.
Wow, so it went lineage.
Yes.
The lineage.
Couldn't even
There's
get
a legacy here.
Yep.
We gonna get your generations too.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of like the through line, right? We're talking about like legacy and people who move through privilege, and then also the ones who are disadvantaged and what that looks like if you make the wrong choice, which now brings us back to why there's so much nervousness, right? Nervousness from the behind the scenes with the journalists and everyone, sort of, what are you doing? You know how this plays out.
You know how it works. Exactly. And that's why I always say to people, the Heritage is not a club you want to join. This isn't something that you're like, yeah, let's go do this. You really think, Talia, you go hang out with John Carlos, and you'll have the time of your life, but you'll walk out of there going, did you make the right call, John? Right? Because his life was ruined by what he did.
Yeah, so by these stark contrasts, now I think it makes sense for us to let's ask the question about the sport that we started with, tennis. How does this play out in tennis?
It's a great question. It's a great question for a bunch of reasons. Number one, the biggest reason is that it's an individual sport. Mm-hmm. So when we always talk about, like when I was finishing the Heritage, like one of the biggest holes in that book that really bothered me was the fact that there were not nearly enough women in there. But then when you start making that list of, okay, how many women were in that position to really, really, really do something, most of the women, especially the black women, because female team sports is not as big here. They're all individuals, and so the first thing that they do as an individual is they're going to come for your money, endorsement-wise. No more Wheaties, no more Nike, no more this, no more that. So you realize that in tennis, you're vulnerable because, one, how many players are really going to be able to make it on prize money alone? I mean, even the best of the best tennis players, once you start slipping out of the top 10, top 20, top 25, your numbers are changing. So you need those endorsements that you get when you get into the top 10 or when you win a major or something like that. So your money as a black woman is way more vulnerable. As a black man, well, ain't no black men in the game anyway in America. So you have to look at the Tsongas and the Monfises and the other guys who are out there, outside of the United States. But the real question when it comes to tennis is protecting your money because you don't necessarily have a salary. And then the second thing, of course, is the culture, especially if you look at it from an American male standpoint. I mean, tennis is a pretty, on the ATP side, the USTA side, it can be pretty red on the player side, even though Katrina's down, even though, you got Martin and you've got, some of the other guys who may have politics that are a bit more favorable when you look at the actual players, it probably is a pretty hostile environment, I would guess.
MAGA all the way.
I think so. I mean, and it's not that it's not true like that on the women too. Looking at Coco Vandeweghe and the rest of them, and you know what the politics of those players is going to really dictate. It's a lonely sport anyway, right? So how do you choose to navigate it becoming even lonelier once everybody knows what you're all about?
And it's an expensive sport too.
Yeah, and it's expensive.
And it's to maintain the cost if you're only going to go by salary. Because a lot of times, if you look at Roger Federer's, wealth, considered to be one of the richest athletes in the world, and Serena, and you look at their prize money to endorsement ratio as opposed to a football player, as in soccer player, you would notice that the money that the soccer player is making is largely from his salary. His wealth is based on his salary. But
that's right.
The tennis player, their wealth is based solely on their price, on their endorsements
and on their
because look, Roger Federer didn't win a major for 5 years, and that would have been his biggest payday, right, from 2012 to 2017. He wasn't collecting that big, like multi-million-dollar prize money check, and there's only 4 of those a year. If you can maintain that, trend, and then taxes take that, you don't really make a lot of money.
No. When you look at those guys and you say, and also, if you're going to find your way around it money-wise, like if you're not going to be a great player, I mean, Federer is obviously a great player, but if you're not a great player, then you're on the hustle. You're playing 80 tournaments a year to make some money. Right. And so when you're looking, if you're like Roger or if you're Serena or somebody like that, and you're going to play, I mean, what did Serena play a couple of years ago? She played, 8 tournaments, something like that. I mean, so there's no question. Obviously, at her level, she's, money's not an issue for her. But in terms of your ability to really say something or to be something bigger, to say something that is going to even remotely be polarizing, it's going to offend the majority, you better be bringing it. You better be a top 3, top 4 player who's winning majors constantly, because I don't think that you've got the insulation that you have in a team sport where the salary, you're bringing in $30 million as a salary. You've got way more protection than if you're relying on T-Mobile to give you endorsement money, because they're going to yank that the minute people get mad at you.
Yep. In fact,
so I don't know how much I feel about that. I was going to say, so I try to back off when it comes to those individual players. Like, I know that we spend a lot of time, because tennis is one of our sports. It's one of the sports we care about. And one of the things that bothers me most about tennis, or at least about tennis coverage, is when you go to a major or when you go to a tournament, there's a lot of black people attending those matches. Black people love tennis, and it doesn't get treated that way. But because of that, there's also, especially on the WTA side, black women are going to dominate this sport over the next 10, 15 years. There's no doubt in my mind about that, just in terms of volume of player and who's actually playing, and now that the sport is more available than it's ever been. So there's going to be questions. I mean, I don't remember, was it you, Rails, who came in on that? You came in at my ESPN colleague, Chrissy Everett, when she made that tweet about Coco Gauff's a leader. She's a teenager. You can put that on her right now. And so
this is the thing though, Howard, to his point. It's like, yes, she is. We're talking about people who have security in tennis, right? And this is the challenge for me. It's like, okay, fine, you want to make it about the teenagers, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But we're talking about security, and we're talking about the insularity of tennis. And so the onus here is actually much more powerfully so on the commentators and the people who have some capacity to feel like their legacy is secure.
Yeah, and who's doing the shaping? They're the ones doing the shaping. I mean, I think that one of the hardest things, tennis is all the sports are going in this direction, right? I mean, there's very little journalism in sports and in sports broadcasting anymore. It's commentator, ex-player, commentator, ex-player, commentator as ex-player, ex-player as commentator. So even when you get into those in-between set panels, Now the people who are getting on those panels as well, those are coaches like Patrick. I mean, the conflicts of interest in tennis, it's such a club. I mean, they don't want to admit it, but it's such a club that you're not really going to get that much independence in there. And so the pressure on players, I mean, I'm just formulating this, so don't hold me to it, even though I'm being recorded right now. But I'm still wondering where the tennis player fits. Because when you think about how the structure of tennis works, they may be the most vulnerable, even though I loved, I loved Francis's video that they did on Instagram the other day. I thought that was great. I mean, I got all inspired looking at that, right? Although I was like, where's Felix? But okay, maybe he had a cold. Maybe he was busy that day. I hope he didn't
Where's
say
Venus?
No. Where's Venus? Well, it was Venus, right?
I know where she is, though. She's collecting that paper. She's collecting those coins. She got a new deal in Fox, right?
That's right.
Fox.
She
probably
holding on
could
to
show
the bag
herself
right
at
now.
CBS, but she's at Fox, so
Right.
we ain't going to see Venus for a while.
So I thought that was great. I think what you're going to need, I liken tennis a little bit to baseball in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, where what's going to happen with the tennis players is what happened with those brothers back then, where they had to stick together. They played against each other, they beat the hell out of each other, but they stuck together because they knew how hostile it was, and they knew how lonely it was, and they knew in a lot of ways they only had each other. And so when I saw that video, that's exactly what it reminded me of.
And that's what I was hopeful about, because let's be honest. I mean, in many ways, some people who end up in tennis are like some people who end up in corporate America, right? Where you're the one, the only. And there's some personality and coping mechanisms there, right? I'm being generous, but maybe you think you're special. Maybe you think you're exceptional.
You know you're special,
and
right?
you know you're special, but you don't believe that you belong to a group, right?
That's right.
What was noteworthy
right.
about the Francis video is that we are all acknowledging together that we're Black people.
That's right.
You know, it's frightening for people to sort of say, "Oh no, individual, you're an individual."
Well, once again, where was Maddie Keys in there, right?
Well.
And once again, when you go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm listening. I want to hear what you have to say.
No, I mean, it is that sort of issue, right? Because it goes back to the individual, and also what do they think they have to lose as an individual, because it's not a group, right? The group isn't going to be burdened with this situation, right? It's going to come down, because my endorsement deal is my endorsement deal only, right? Taylor Townsend doesn't feel the effect when I'm dropped, perhaps, so I get that's part of what it is. But are you saying? Sorry, go ahead.
I don't know that that's the reason Madison Keys isn't there, though. I don't know that she yet identifies as a Black woman, and that's really why I think she's missing.
100%. She does not identify as a Black woman. I don't know if you ever saw LZ's piece on her. That's the thing. Who do you want to play you in a movie? Julia Roberts? For real?
Jesus, help me.
Right? For real? So I'm not, I'm not Black or white. I'm just me. I'm just Maddie. I'm like, well, and once again, and I say to people all the time, if that's who you are, then you go and do you. Mm-hmm. But don't tell me that a choice isn't being made here.
Yep.
That's all. Just acknowledge that you're making a choice.
Well, there's a choice though, because there was a time, couldn't we make the same parallel with James Blake? How did that turn out?
Well, James Blake is the same thing that Harry Edwards said about Tiger Woods. He said when Tiger got that DUI, that arrest report didn't say Cablinasian, did it?
We shouldn't laugh, but
I mean, but it's one of those. I mean, sometimes I feel sympathy for these people, but then it's when I go back to someone like Colin Kaepernick, right? It's just like I think in spaces like that, right? I mean, because NFL is a hostile environment, right? There is no doubt in my mind, though it's an NBA and MLB, though it's quite clear that those sports industries are dominated by people of color, Black men in particular. They get the message that you realize, you are the worker, okay, sir? You
That's right.
Don't imagine that you are, You are the brand here. You know, you have a place and you would stick to that place. But Colin did the work. You know what I mean?
That's
And
right.
he did the research and he did the reading. And because this is the thing that bothers me, is that you can't tell me you don't feel the microaggressions. At the very least, when you go into certain spaces, you can't tell me that you don't feel the microaggression. It wasn't by
Yeah.
accident that Lindsay Davenport, Jennifer Capriati, and Martina Hingis back in the day felt comfortable sitting in front of a press conference and saying they were getting endorsement deals because they were black. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
sugarcoat that. They didn't even try to use euphemism. They were very
Yeah.
clear in what they were saying and how
Mm-hmm.
they thought it was sort of unfair to whatever the case may be. They weren't looking at the magic. They weren't looking at the how the Madison Avenue plays out. But
Mm-hmm.
meanwhile, we're gonna turn around and see call Maria Sharapova Serena's rival, and be like, and not question how is it she getting all the endorsement deal, and the number one player out here struggling to get a proper deal altogether. We
Mm-hmm.
had to wait till
Mm-hmm.
Maria was. We found out she was, nipping in the little old PED bag, and getting a little extra spinach
A little
boost.
meldonium, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and you know what? Go ahead.
so I find it's rather odd in a lot of these spaces that that the athletes themselves but are not aware of what's actually going on, but maybe it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
in
they
order to
are
cope.
aware of it. I think they are aware of it, and I think it is. I think it is 100% a coping mechanism, especially when you think about where do we come from, right? If you're one of those people, and I used to have this argument all the time about Barack Obama. We used to talk about this constantly, going back and forth about this, about where you fit. You spend a lot of time as the only black person in class, or if you grow up in the suburbs, if you grow up around white people. After a while, you do start to believe, if if you're not centered, that you're different, or that you're the bridge, or
Mhm.
or that it's your responsibility as a minority to accommodate them, to not ask enough questions and to not demand enough things. Because if you demand too much, then you're going to be isolated, right? If you grow up the way I grew up, down like on Cape Cod, when we left Boston, we moved down to the Cape. There, went a black family for miles, right? I mean, what could you possibly realistically ask for without running the risk of not having any friends? Who are you going to talk to? So people in those situations spend a lot of time accommodating for survival. Now, the question is, once you don't have to do that anymore, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep accommodating, or are you going to branch out on your own and find out who you are? And I think it's important because Colin, with white parents, adopted the whole thing. He could have made a different choice. So when Reels is talking about actually doing the reading, he made a choice too. And the choice was, I'm not accommodating. I am making my call. I'm black. And the number of people who tried to undermine Colin when he first took his knee and said, well, I went to college with Colin. He was never like that. I'm like, yeah, because he was doing the reading. And once he did the reading, he sort of recognized, I don't belong on this side. This isn't who I am. And
But
so, and so I think in
being
tennis,
adopted, I know that they were constantly going to make him feel like, you should be grateful that white people
that's
took
right.
you in. That these
hmm
people are not your parents, they're your benefactors. They saved your life.
That's right.
So that was thrown in his face initially, I
Lots of
know.
pressure. I remember dating this black woman when I was in college, and she had white parents because she was adopted, and they told her point blank, if you try looking for your natural family, we forbid it. I was like, what? Like, because I said that's got to be out of fear, because they know if she finds out who she is, maybe she's not going to need you as much anymore. I don't know. But that was those pressures are exactly real, and they're especially real in particularly or overwhelmingly white spaces. I mean, if you're going to be a black tennis player,
Yep.
and you have elite world class ability, I mean, in a lot of ways, unless you're going to call Kamal Murray or have Donald Young's parents, you're not going to have a lot of black people in the sport.
And you know how that is characterized. I mean, I think if you think about the broader language around even Kamau and Donald, is that
Mm-hmm.
the reason for their players' lack of success
That's right.
is
And
somehow
exactly.
is essentialist in some way. It's because they've stuck with, in a weird way, they've stuck with the
Mm-hmm.
black side, right?
Exactly. You stuck
People
with blackness. You paid for blackness.
Yep.
And that, especially in tennis, that there's something about being black historically in the game. You can't possibly know as much as the white people in this sport know. You can't possibly have
Sure.
strong enough development. And then if you go with good to be great or something like that, that you have to go in that direction. I mean, I find it fascinating, and I watch it very closely. Don't have enough information yet, but just sort of keep adding to it and taking notes. What Coco's game is going to be under the Federer empire, where she goes, how that manifests, what that looks like. Because as much as Roger has a connection with black people, obviously on his mother's side and the whole South Africa thing and his African connections and all of that, I'm still very interested in finding out how that manifests in having a prodigy or having having somebody in your stable who's got real ability. What's going to happen when Coco's an adult? Are they telling her that you can have both sides of yourself because you're supposed to, because it's who you are? Or are they, or is that message still being sent like it's sent to every black person with ability, that the further you get away from blackness, the more lucrative your life can be?
Well, do you think?
Well, I
mean,
think
I'm
she's
curious
already
about-
put that to bed.
right?
No? She's already just like, I have made my choice. Okay.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you have to walk around
Well,
me now.
We don't have, but you know what? We might not even have to ask that question. Look at the transformation of sort of, or what's been happening with Naomi.
I was exactly right. I was going to say the same thing, and that is a fascinating thing to watch, and it's going to be also fascinating to watch when things return, what the response is going to be, and what happens when she has the inevitable struggles.
Yep.
Is there going to be the support group, or is it going to be like, gotcha, told you so, see you later?
I already think it's already there because people were already suggesting those things. Because I mean, Naomi,
I said it from the beginning,
yeah.
right? I said just wait till they realize that she doesn't identify necessarily as Asian. She identifies as being black.
Yeah.
Wait till they find out, and she says, I grew up in a Haitian household, speak Creole, eat Haitian food, and I was just like, that's it right there. Trust me.
And her Twitter feed is kind of like,
she knows spices, it's over.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think
not put a mic in front of that girl.
No, I think a decision has been made at this point in time by Coco and Naomi that they are black.
Yes.
They are black. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like Ta-Nehisi Coates' black president, right? It's like, we have black tennis players. They self-identify that way and they make choices in that way. And I might even suggest that they're one of the few, even amongst black players, who have said out loud, I am black.
Yeah, well, that's why Monfils is always so much fun for me, because he's actually, I love the fact that Monfils comes out and says that he plays Washington for that reason.
Yes, I know. I love about him too.
Right? Because, I mean, if we're really, like, just keeping it real for just a tiny minute.
Keep it real. This is the podcast to do that.
Right? I'm like, would I play Washington? Washington, I mean, it's not a raggedy tournament per se. It's a fun tournament.
It is. It's very homey.
It's a homey tournament.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a luxury tournament.
Nope.
But I'll tell you something though. When Monfils plays, for example, in New York, everyone is cheering for him, black, white, indifferent, right? The crowd is there.
John Isner alert.
But
wounded feelings. My Americanness should.
You hurt my feelings.
Everything.
How come they're not?
I mean,
how come they're not rooting for me?
Americans out there cheering Philipp Kohlschreiber, a German, over Isner. Yeah. That's all. I'm not even worrying about the Monfils.
I was at that match, and oh my goodness, I was like, oh my God, I'm having so much fun watching this right now.
So I can imagine
he's
Monfils
really mad. Yep.
I can imagine Monfils' energy when he goes to a place like Washington. He's just like, if they love me in New York, and this is a mixed crowd, just imagine when it's my people. Because he's not getting that in Paris either, right? He's not, he's getting a kind of he's getting a patriotic love in Paris, right? But in Washington, he's getting a people love. This is just genuine, love. Like, we don't even care if you win or lose. We're going to cheer you if you win, right? But what we want to do is hang with you and give you some,
Yeah.
spicy
I was at
food.
that match on Armstrong when Isner was having a little tiny baby because they were rooting for Monfils. And every time he hit an ace, he would like look at the crowd like, yeah, and the crowd was like, get him next time, Gail. Get him next time, Gail. You'll get the next one, Gail. Right?
I
And
really
the
wish.
only thing bad about that match was that Monfils lost. I was like, I hope he wins this match.
I know.
I
Please
really
let
wish
him win this
I would
match.
save that energy for the UST and tell them, could you fix the code, please? Could you fix the code so that I can at least go beyond the third round? Because, I mean, it ain't Monfils' problem at the US Open. It's not Monfils. Just, so we know.
No,
It's
funny.
so that's always been my question though, on some level with Monfils or any of these players, is I wonder, and this is a strange thing to ask maybe, but can a black male player thrive and do well in tennis? Is there some element of that sport that just doesn't quite fit?
Right.
Well,
So
I mean-
one of my when I was playing, my son's coach is one of the legends in black tennis, Art Carrington. And Art used to play, he and Arthur Ashe, they were doubles partners and whatnot back in the, in the Black Tennis Association and everything. And so Art lives out here in Western Mass. And so, he's my dude out there. And I was playing one day and there was some overhead smash and I went up because I was having some fun. I was doing a little Monfils thing, decided to go jump up and hit an overhead smash. And he looked so disappointed because I left my feet. He's like, don't be jumping around here looking like a monkey. I was like, damn, Art. I was like, come on, Art. So, absolutely to the point. And when you see Francis Tiafoe do his LeBron James type of thing, and he's starting to bring a little bit of that, black style athleticism to the sport, it lands differently.
Yep.
Now, you can make an argument that it lands differently for now because we haven't seen it before. Just like, when you first saw Tiger getting all amped up and psyched up when he was making putts and everything, golf hadn't seen that kind of energy before, and now everybody does it, right? So maybe somebody's going to have to be that early adopter because let's face it, outside of Arthur Ashe, and Arthur Ashe doesn't even necessarily count because you had Connors there and you still had Laver there. There has never been a black player who was the best player in the world.
Nope. And that is shocking given
there's never been.
Yep.
Right? So we've never seen what tennis looks like when dominated by the best with a black player whose style is going to be accepted.
A black male player.
A black male player. That's what we're talking. We're talking about the guys right now.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is, can tennis actually deal with a black male?
I don't think they can. I don't think they can.
I'm actually
No, I'm sorry.
I said I wasn't slighting the WTA.
Oh no. I actually think that they would probably handle a black male tennis player a lot better and easier than a black female tennis player.
Oh no, we gonna have to fight about that.
No,
we gonna have to fight about
I'll tell you this. Let me just say this, and I am happy to be open to discussion. It's because in many ways, Serena, and if you look, maybe because we're too comfortable in the fact that we understand that Venus and Serena have dominated this sport and been a part of this sport for such a long time. Even when they're not playing, they dominate the sport because no one, Maria Sharapova is here just for sex appeal, but no one has been culturally. I'm sorry?
I said they created the modern sport. People like to talk about, where's the legacy in terms of black female players. Venus and Serena created the entire sport in the past 30 years because it's like you had to create a different type of player who could hit with them.
Yeah.
So they changed who got to play. Their level of influence is kind of off the charts.
And also just in terms of popular culture, right? Because they just bring that kind of energy. Just Venus just has to smile on TV, and it's over for a lot of people. But I would say that because to me, I think a black male in that space would easily compromise. He would easily accommodate that that the black male wouldn't go in there, and because we've noticed, like if you see like Michael Jordan, he didn't say anything for a long time, if ever. LeBron waited 10 years to say something, and I'm thinking that because not even just like the political aspect of it, just in terms of influence, acknowledging the influence on the sport itself, because look how long the women WTA will not acknowledge that the thing is that the women need a proper serve, and that the problem with a lot of the game is that the women are not serving properly. Just they
That's
just
right.
have shitty serve, right? That you know that anybody can just step in. That despite the fact that the rackets have improved, the power game has improved, overall ground stroke, whatever the case may be, that the serve is still a vulnerable part, the most vulnerable part. Because I
And
mean,
the most
the lady
important part, it's a serve dominant game.
right. But we question this. I mean, look, Andy Murray is Andy Murray because he don't have a serve, right? And we know Rafa had to improve his serve. We can speak Nadal, Djokovic had to improve himself. We can speak rings around Federer serve. That we didn't mention the influence. And if you go back to Steffi Graf never had a great serve. She just wanted to start the point, and that
sounds like Rafa.
And that was used as an influence on the women's game. Steffi Graf lack of a good serve. It's the reason why Ivanovic serve is blowing all over the place while there's no wind, right? It's because they're copying Steffi Graf. But when we talk about Venus and Serena's game style and whatever the case may be, we talk about that on its own. Serena has to say so many times, I'm not the hardest person who hits on the toe. I am not the hard. We talk about Venus serve, and that shit even none existed. Venus is turning 20 miles an hour.
Just her second serve.
I mean, I'm just saying that that they would not acknowledge, because the black woman, as Malcolm X says, the most disrespected person in the world, but they're never given their due, even when we are watching it, because all of these women on the toe, they're like, who's the toughest competitor? Serena, Venus. You know what I mean? It's them, right? I mean, Venus at Wimbledon is a dangerous being, right? You never know. You gotta get her out early, because once she start rolling, look how she did to Kanta, and that was what 2 years ago. You know what I mean? So, and Venus is pushing 40, so I would say that though it would be they're much more accommodating in terms of that they would have to accept. Though they would be accepted in a certain extent, they wouldn't acknowledge the greatness. They wouldn't give them their due. They would quickly add a man, because the black man, it's much easier, because look, there are ways in which they can control him. They think they can control a black man over a black female. I think,
but you know what?
The black man is also willing to be controlled in some ways.
I really feel like that part of the reason that Monfils is so loved as a black male tennis player is because he's not American. I felt that way for a long time.
If he was no threat, and he's no threat,
right?
He's no threat. A long haul.
If he was, an American black man behaving the way that he does on court, he would be a thug, or he doesn't know how to act. He would totally be chastised for his behavior.
But if Monfils was winning, though, if Monfils was winning, though,
that's an interesting question, though, Reels, because I think for a lot of white men, this is a very safe space that black men have not invaded.
No.
Right? No, I mean, think about it. It's similar to like hockey to me. Like, there are certain spaces that white men still feel very much as if they are atop.
Well, we own this.
You own this. That is
golf, right?
That's siege. That's a siege. A black male coming in and being a black male, by all the things that we mean, both unsaid and said, is a different approach, I think. Look at how they have treated Serena and Venus. Imagine a black male transforming this sport in this way.
That's right. Well,
that's a heady combination for people. Yeah, I think Janina is right. Monfils is perceived as French and special, extraordinaire.
Yeah.
They giggle at what he says. There's no threat perceived by him.
There is no.
And especially too, imagine what it looks like.
They don't have the work ethic, though. That's just.
Well, I was going to say there's a couple things at work here. Number one is, imagine if you had a black male tennis player who came in to the sport as a teenager, like Rafa or Becker or somebody that young, who had grown up on LeBron, and had grown up on black male team sports. So they came in with all that culture and all that swagger and all that attitude, bringing that into the country club game, where they're expecting you to wear all whites and everything. And like, you could see it a little bit with Francis, because Francis is ripping off his shirt and everything, and you could see that when people looking at him like, what you doing? You don't do that here,
And
right? Like, has everyone? I will not presume. Have we all been to Wimbledon, or have we not all been to Wimbledon?
no.
Not all of it.
I'm the traveler on this podcast.
You're the traveler.
Yes.
Okay. So
They
I don't
sent me
remember
out.
which year. Every year there's an element of it since I've been there. But which year was it where you had that classic second round match, third round match between Heather Watson and Serena? Was it 13?
Yes. Oh my
Or
God.
was it 15? Were you at that match? I was at that match. And I remember, even before that, right? Now, if you look at players, and it's very difficult to have these conversations because people get all pissed off about it, even though we just talk about bodies, right?
Yep.
If you're going to cover sports, you got to talk about bodies. Serena is about what? Serena's 5'9.5". She is probably, the media guide says she's 150 pounds. She's probably about 155, 160, right? I don't know how much she weighs now, but in her prime, she was about that, right? So when you look at her, okay, she's strong, she's muscular, she's got an athletic body. If you look at Angelique Kerber's 5'8", about 150. They're almost the same size.
Mm-hmm.
If you see them if you watch them side by side, they're not that different. If you look at someone like Muguruza is 6'1". She weighs about 160 pounds. So when you're looking at these women, these bodies are enormous. They are big. I'm 5'10", 190. I feel like a shrimp, walking around them, right? However, I'm watching one of these matches, and if you just go sit, center court is an amazing venue because where the media sits, you're still really close. You're not that far away, and because of the acoustics of center court, even with the roof open, you can hear people. You can hear people in center court, right? And the way that the white Wimbledon crowd reacts to everything Serena does, you would think that it was like King Kong or something. The racism in dealing with the intimidation. Like there were times when Serena she'd just take a ground stroke and you would look at the crowd and they would shudder, like at that strength. And what
Shudder
chance
at
does
that
this?
black greatness. That's
It's black greatness, but it's black strength.
Yeah.
And I'm like, she don't even hit the ball hardest on tour, but it's the way that she looks.
Yeah,
Yes.
As opposed
Maddie
to,
does
right?
it. Isn't Madison Keys the one that hits the hardest ball?
Yes.
Exactly, right? But them white women in the crowd don't react to Madison Keys hitting the forehand the way they do Serena.
No, they don't.
That is a pigmentation question right there.
Yes.
that is the thing. That is the thing I think it's going to that pops up. I think for black women in sports as opposed to black men in sports, right? It is understood that the black man is supposed to be strong, right? He's some superhuman freak, and we can all worship him in the sporting prowess. But black women,
that's right.
Black women is somehow there is a cheat going on here, right? Like somehow
Always a cheat.
There's always a cheat, right?
But I was gonna say it was also that sort of superhuman thing, but the superhumanness of Serena was not a compliment.
No.
Right. It's offensive.
It was offensive. They were offended, and I don't remember, which little wayfish Eastern European she was crushing at the time, but you could see the sympathy that they had for her. What chance does this poor little white girl wearing all her white, what chance do they have against her?
Meanwhile, they won't admit that little girl was turning some little stones for a serve, and that's why she's on the back foot, right? That she has no hope in a prayer if she's gonna stand off the point with a 20-mile-an-hour serve, just begging for the returner to dominate.
But this is why you now have a language around the power game, right?
Yes.
Failing to understand that Lindsay had a power game.
Lindsay, and also, because one of the perks that you have as a journalist when you get to play at the All England Club. We get to play before the matches start. We can go play, right? You can't play on the grass because the grass is wet. Okay. You can go indoors in the indoor courts, right? And so if you've got to connect, you can go walk in. So I'm sitting here hitting one day, and Lindsay's there with her son. Lindsay's 6'3".
Mm-hmm.
Lindsay Davenport is enormous.
She's like a big girl. Mm-hmm.
I saw Lindsay at the U.S. Open one day walking down 3rd Street, and 3rd Avenue, and she was on the phone. She'd gone shopping somewhere, and I was looking at her going, holy shit. So the point that I was trying to make is that all of these players are world-class super athletes.
And extraordinarily big. Yep.
And extraordinarily
And they
big.
train, right? This is their job, right?
But exactly, which is what their job is. But unless you're, except for Aga Radvanska, because she still wants to be a woman. And you know, I mean, so what if she looks like the mummy by the end of the year? She got so much tape on her. I'm like, damn, she looks embalmed. So, but the difference is that the reaction to the optics of Serena.
Yeah.
They didn't treat her, even when she was losing, they didn't treat her, you know, the same way. When other players were out there hitting her off the court, they were still intimidated by her power simply because of that optic.
Well, John McEnroe said that, you know, it was okay for Justine to cheat because, you know, she had to cheat in order to win against Serena. There was just, you know,
which is
that's,
why
there's no other way.
Which
that's
is the
just
larger,
balancing.
yeah, which is the larger point of Maria Sharapova and why she continues to be seen as a rival, because her cheating doesn't delegitimize her wins at all. The few
That's
that she
right.
had. It's because that's what you have to do when you are playing against someone who is unfairly gifted, right?
Yeah,
But
I still think
here's-
they're rivals, and the reason why I think they were rivals is because they just couldn't stand each other. Because
Well, that
it was
emotional.
Well,
I mean, they were rivals. Ain't no question. Somebody says, "Oh, it wasn't a rivalry." No, I, you know, language dude that I am, I will make the distinction. Was it competitive? No. Was it a rivalry? 100%.
I don't even think that Maria took up that much headspace in Serena's head. I would hope she didn't, because
I think she did. I think she was like, I will never say it out loud, but I ain't losing to you again.
oh, that's
ever.
different. Oh, well, that's different. That's different. That's
I mean-
personal. I'm gonna handle my business on the court, right? Because that's what matters, right? I'm not gonna.
Yeah, but it's not like she's
street
just another
cred.
opponent. She's like, I ain't losing
Right.
to you.
I mean, Serena showed up with half a long 2 steps away from a wheelchair in 2015 to be like, girl, we're gonna snatch this trophy away from you.
And I gotta say it, maybe this is just like conspiracy theory on my part, but there was kind of a little bit. I will just preface this by saying I know I'm probably 95% wrong on this, but that 5% is so strong in me that in
that's
when-
not how
when
math works,
Serena-
but okay.
when Serena withdrew in the French Open, I was like, she don't
Yes.
know for sure she can
Yes.
win.
I am
was
with you.
I
am
know
with
for
you,
sure
Howard.
she thinks she can win this one.
You know,
Yes.
I'll
so
give you
there-
the
I
walkover,
believe it.
but I ain't
So there is a,
retiring,
and
you ain't beating me.
Amen to
there
that.
is a
I
story.
said that at the time. I believe it. Listen, I believe it 100%. I'm screw the other 95. You're not willing to get
That's
there
like
is-
that. I'm putting a bet. That's like when Nole sees Federer. He's like, I am ready.
Yep.
For you right now. I'm not even doing well, but I will.
Well, also
beat
when he plays Nadal, I ain't losing to you. You know, I mean,
I don't mind that one so much.
right? I mean,
It's true. It's gonna be struggle tennis all the
Like,
way
okay.
up until he sees Nadal, and he's just like,
Yeah.
oh,
all right,
This is
Dennis
something-
Istomin. Okay, you might get me, Dennis Istomin. All right.
exactly.
You know, Stan. Okay, Stan, you might get me. Rafa,
Yes,
you ain't getting me.
listen to me.
No,
Ain't
don't
no
even
good
say that.
feeling
It's not
in
even
tennis.
Rafa. It's not Rafa. I have to beg to differ.
You think it's Roger?
Nole gets a special thrill.
No, he gets a
Especially that
special
moment.
thrill because he
See,
knows he
I
has
got-
to
this
play
has
his.
gotta be
I think
partisan,
the thrill
because
is that he.
I think it's both of them. I think
You know what he says? I think
I
someone
hate
has
you
asked
both.
him. Somebody has asked him who he doesn't like losing to, and I think he has said Federer, because I think, I mean, it's in a weird way he's beaten Rafa so many times. You know, for
yeah.
a good chunk of time, he's like sort of like was beating Rafa, like that was like his thing for dinner, right? But it's like somehow or another. But maybe you're right. Maybe just both of them. But I just think that when he sees those two rivals, no matter how ordinary his tennis has been up to that point, he just dials in. So there is some psychological advantage.
No
Well,
doubt. I mean, there's
that
no
is
it's
true
and
because
it works in the
that's
dual
why
effect.
he's a third wheel, right? That's why
Right, but
he's
it
a
works in
third
the
wheel on
dual-
the bicycle.
But doesn't it also work in the dual effect? I mean, if you're Nadal, you're like, oh shit, I got to play him again. I mean, off clay, Nadal has not taken a set off Djokovic in 7 years.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that as a Rafa fan. Thank
I mean,
you.
7 years.
Is it
No,
just
no,
me? But is it just me? But I feel like when Nole plays Nadal, he's like, I can win this point at any point. But you
At
know
any
what?
point. Mhm.
I'm playing with my food here. I am playing with
Yep.
my.
He does do that. It's horrible.
But I think for me, when he plays Federer, I think he knows that Federer is going to bring his best tennis, and
And what do you think the difference is?
but
What's the
I
difference?
think that there's so many things because Federer doesn't Nadal, he's beating Nadal by being a better version of Nadal, right? He's beating Nadal from the back of the court. I think he has to come up with a way better game against Federer in terms of like all code, much more variety in style of play. There is the crowd factor, right? Because this is an ego trip now. He wants to embarrass the
Yeah.
crowd. And also, at the end of the day, Federer really plays him really well. There is an
Yeah, I think it's
unpredictable nature to it that even if he has like two sets to love over Federer, right? That Federer can swing either way. It can
yeah.
also, Federer has a problem going over the hump, but that's a
Mhm.
whole other conversation. Is the fact that Federer gets to the finish line, doesn't
Yeah, I think
necessarily
there's
always
one other
cross
thing
it.
too. I
So,
think there's
But
one
I
other
think
thing
the
with that.
thing with Nole though, I think Nole has learned over time that just because Federer can rise to the occasion doesn't mean that he will get over that hump. So
That
he
you
just
can
has
ride
to
it.
remain
Mhm.
excellent
and
in key
calm.
moments. He just has to
Just
stay excellent.
calm.
Because you've
Well-
watched in the last couple encounters, it's not a consistently great match. But what
No.
Nole will do is this a set point? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm dialed in. Is this a
Well,
break point?
exactly. When
Yeah.
you watch each of those, when you watch Djokovic play against each of those players, when you watch as a Nadal guy, when you watch those matches, you immediately see how hard Rafa has to work on his serve. He don't get no love holds. There's no 15s. There's everything is deuce. Everything is 30. Everything is break point. He's working. So I'm like, at some point you're gonna lose because you cannot maintain that level with his serve. The difference when he plays Roger is the serve.
Yep.
Roger's serve is so good that Roger can get a 60-second hold off anybody,
Mhm.
everybody, and so
And he's
when
in your
trying-
and he's in your service game. He
He's-
is
and he can get it
determined that
exactly.
you will not
He can get
love.
in
You
your
will not be
games.
getting by love.
No, that's right.
So-
And so Roger, I mean, the most underrated thing about Roger Federer is how much of a fighter he is. People treat him like he's some sort of artiste. Roger Federer is here to kick your ass. He's here to fight. And
He's
so,
petty. He's
so
petty.
the problem that Roger has is that Roger has to work so hard, to get there. And when he finally does get there, then he rushes it.
Yep.
And then he rushes it, and he's not. I mean, those 2 match points at Wimbledon, he just rushed them both.
Yeah.
And
Not
he got
necessarily.
He saw the trophy in his
unnecessarily.
hand.
It was over.
Howard, we
saw the
don't need to
trophy in his
revisit this.
Oh,
We don't
wait.
need to. We will not
The
revisit
lady
that.
who
Just-
was bringing it up all the time. Hold
Yep.
up. Don't be trying to act like you're the decorum.
But all this tennis talk is making me actually realize how much I miss it, and that is not what I want to remember right now.
It's
Yeah.
But okay, well let's go this. Let's go in this one last thing on this point though.
Yep.
Is that
Roger
but
Federer,
then when
so-
when Djokovic plays Stan, he realizes that Stan can blow me off the court.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of an interesting thing. Stan is the only guy who can blow you off the court and finish the job.
Right.
But you see,
Roger
if
can
he's
blow
in the
Djokovic
mood.
off the court, but exactly if he feels like playing.
Exactly. And
Because if he
and
doesn't
you
feel
would
like
know this
playing,
from
he's
the
going
first
out
set.
early.
Yeah.
You would know from the first set. So I think
Yep.
all you have to do if you're playing Stanley is wait to see which version shows up.
Which,
More than likely, you're gonna get the 9 out of 10 times Stanley show up there. The one who don't care, who is mumbling and fumbling about all kind of things.
Yeah.
So, because Federer knows when he meet that 1 out of 10 Stanley, he's just like, all right, it's over for
all
anybody.
right,
right?
it's your day today, but I've had you so many times it's not fun.
Right. So
Right.
Federer
Yeah.
could eat that L and be comfortable. He could eat that L and be comfortable because he knows tomorrow at Basel he gonna get Stanley and he ain't worried
Right.
about that. But the other two, when Nadal and Djokovic see that Stanley across the net, they're like, he needs to pee in a cup right now. They want to
Exactly.
that.
Although
They wanna
I
be
will
like,
say, whenever
this is not the real person.
whenever I see Stan on court against Roger, there's one sentence that always comes to mind. Shut up, Mirka.
We kind of all
Say
love
it
that.
out loud on court. Shut up, Mirka. I'm like, okay, they all know each other. I am sick of you.
Look at those, all your secrets.
I know exactly. You know everything. All that I have done, you know it. And also, behind them aviators. I know you don't like me.
Damn Skippy, I don't like you.
And especially behind them aviators with your perfect nails and everything else. I know you don't like me.
But
You know
the
what? America
funniest
probably
part
don't
about
like
that whole story is that she got up out of her seat. No one could have hold her back, and she went to the court and she told him what she had to say. Like she didn't just scream it from the stand like Kimberly. She got up and she just like, you know what? You're a motherfucker, and you're always gonna be a motherfucker. Now lose this goddamn match, bitch. That's what I thought. Well, Tony couldn't even hold her back. She just like, Tony, leave me alone. Hold my purse, bitch. I'm gonna handle my business there. My man is down here getting his ass kicked. No, not from this mofo. She doesn't even leave her seat for Djokovic.
I know.
It's crazy. Like, girl, like you should have done that at Wimbledon, right?
Don't mess with Mirka.
Don't exactly. Do not mess with her.
Don't mess with Mirka.
That is so funny. Shut up, Mirka. I'm like, y'all, this is too much.
No, I don't know if you've had a chance. I don't know if you've had just because Janina said we're missing it. Have you had a chance to take a It's fair if you haven't. Have you had a chance to look at the U.S. Open plans?
The U.S. Open plan, the French plan, the Laver Cup. I'm looking at this going, y'all all know it's the same days, right?
Well, luckily for us, Laver Cup has moved itself. It said, we're leaving this year alone. So we're 2021. Get us then if COVID's over.
They canceled Boston?
Yeah, they moved out. They moved out of it.
Oh, like, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
First of all, no European in their right mind is gonna come to America for nothing. Because here's the thing, because they might be able to come in, but would their country let them back in? Would they be able to go?
Canadians don't even want to come here.
Yeah, so it's a different. So I think we go keep missing tennis for a little bit. I will say.
So, but is the French is still on the French is September, right?
The French is still trying to be on. And I think the U.S. Open is flirting with some plans, which I think they just recently dropped, but we could talk about that a little bit later, that maybe another time. But I think what they're trying to do is limit the number of entourage members that can be here. They want to offering multiple tests. They want to make sure that you are quarantined for a certain period of time before you arrive. There's just a whole series of things.
How are they flying? They're separating in a
no, private jet. They're doing private flights.
See something.
Could you
I think
the U.S. Open with two. I'm wondering if you could do it with two roofs, because you've got two covered right now, because Armstrong is covered. So if you can do that, I wonder how many seeds could you actually get to if you played it in October, November before the weather got to you.
I mean,
true.
But see, the problem with that,
by the second week of the U.S. Open. The second week of the U.S. Open on regular schedule, it starts to get a little cooler.
Exactly. No, I was wondering about in terms of the accommodation of whether you could actually play weather-wise indoors if those stadiums just would get too cold anyway.
The thing about it is, though, for COVID, the indoors is the downside.
Right.
That's the biggest.
That's right. It's better to be outside. 100%.
It's better to be outside. So I actually like the initial plan that people flirted, which was to have it in Indian Wells, because it's hot throughout the year, and you could, and it's big enough, and you can conceivably isolate people in all manners.
And it's still the U.S. Open. It doesn't have to be in New York. It could be anywhere.
Nope. It could be anywhere in New York.
That's actually pretty
cool. Once California get that, they're not letting that go.
I know.
That's what I say. You think Larry Ellison's going to let that go? It's not the
Larry
fifth major.
Ellison just
it's
like,
the
you can
fourth
actually,
major.
he's going to be like, you can have Ericsson Open, you can have Indian Wells. You can put it out there. We don't care. January, February, March, May. We don't care which day you want to have it. But that'd be interesting. I mean, I think these people need to let this go. I mean, because...
I think this year we may need to put it as a rest, I think.
I agree.
Lord. Maybe, you know what? I think they're using the protest, to distract them, because no one is looking at COVID plans. Be like, this don't make any sense, right? Because...
I don't think you can. I really just don't see, and I'm obviously on the baseball side of this right now, listening to those guys fighting with each other. I just don't see how you can do this with any sort of confidence, because one, the calendar, it's June.
Yep.
I mean, the calendar is eating you up already right now. Two, is anybody in condition to play? So what's that going to look like? I mean,
the Olympics knew they had to stop that right away, because no one can train.
I mean, who's ready to play right now? How much time do you all need to ramp up? And then also, with everything going the way it's going to the point, you don't even know necessarily the travel schedule, and does it really work? I mean, okay, you can go play with no fans or whatever. But do I want to watch a tennis match with nobody there?
Well,
I
even
just
beyond that, I mean, the safety of it all, it doesn't matter if there are fans there or not. These leagues are big. People come in contact with lots of different people.
Yeah.
For the health and safety of everyone, they shouldn't be playing. I mean, but people are just
no
so
doubt about that.
fucking money hungry, and they can't put themselves aside for the greater good. We have to play. We have to play. None of us are happy. I am a sports fan way beyond tennis. I am missing live sports just as much as everybody else. But you know what? It's not the end of the world. It's not time, and we need to just let it go.
And also with the
It's
protest.
completely true.
I mean, also, just let's be honest with the protest.
Yeah.
The protest has completely changed COVID. It's completely because now we're seeing COVID rates that were based on us opening up in early May, which people
You
forgot.
get all kinds of spikes now because everybody's all on top of each other.
Exactly. Everyone is all over. They're wearing masks as best that they can, and they're outside. But apparently the tear gas is also makes it that much harder for you to breathe, and so you're taking in more breath, and you're doing all kinds of things. So it's happening worldwide.
Well, and these people are putting on these masks that are, yes, it's helping. Does it really protect you? No, it doesn't.
Yeah, these are
I
not
mean,
necessarily effective
these
masks.
aren't there. You can put a bandana over your mouth all you want. You're probably still getting it. True story.
Well, true story. And on top of that, right?
Yeah.
I do have to say though, my favorite mask story, living out here in the woods as I do, is the number of people who will sit with their mask on and then take their mask off to smoke.
Or talk to you.
I'll talk to you. I noticed that. They talk to you. I mean, they have a mask on, but are they wearing it properly? No, it's below their chin. Their chin is protected. You know,
And then the number of people who wear their mask, it's like, hey, it's under your nose. That's defeating the entire purpose of the whole thing. Right?
They don't.
I mean, I don't. It is true.
I just talk them all up to being Trumpers.
I'm like, I'm going to stay in the house.
No, we're all staying in the house. That's just how we're doing. So, Howard, let me ask you, I need to know, because I'm like in my own head, the whole protest, how are you feeling? Are you hopeful like Ta-Nehisi Coates? I can't believe he said that, but I love it.
I am, well, my son tried to go out the other day. He's gone out to 3 of them already in this past week, and he's 15. And I have said to him that this whole thing is just white people talking to other white people, right? I'm like, we're not asking for anything. And I'm trying to explain to him, I'm like, look, I don't beg for my humanity. I'm not going out there to beg you for my humanity. I would rather you just leave me alone. However, what I will say is that there is something remarkable happening right now. I have 2 fears. The remarkable part of it is that I think it's a perfect storm. I think people are spending a lot of time talking about Black Lives Mattering. I'm not really sure this is about Black Life Mattering. I think that people have had it. I think it's the accumulation of this president, to be honest. I think it's the accumulation of that. I think it's the accumulation of being cooped up in the house for 3 months. I think it's the accumulation, especially on the Democratic white woman side, of getting punched in the stomach by Elizabeth Warren and by Brett Kavanaugh and by Hillary Clinton. I think everybody is starting to feel like I'm not in the spot that I thought I was in, and this is sort of getting away. And I think that part of it is wrapped up in obviously seeing what happened with George Floyd and everything. But as people keep asking, what's the difference? And especially from a corporate standpoint, too, we don't have any new information today that we didn't have with Sandra Bland or that we didn't have before that. So why now? And every time I look at it, I think about the White House. I think that white people are realizing that they're not free either. Nope. That the white man's burden had always been what to do with the black people you brought here that you didn't want. And now white people are starting to realize that I can't just have the right values and say the right things and have supposedly the right acquaintances and be free. Because look at what's happening to me. And so I'm very wary of this entire moment being wrapped around Black life mattering. I'm not sure that's what it is.
I think that's fair, because I think as we raise the specter of like prison abolition, police abolition, you could see certain kind of resistances coming up, right? You could see the like, well, not that far.
I was gonna say, well, hang on a minute. My dad was a cop.
Yeah, and actually, to be fair, I was listening to something before with James Blake and the rest of the tennis team talking a little bit about the moment. And one of the points they were really talking about this whole conversation around good and bad cops. And so what really led me to understand, and listen, people, don't get into a battle with me about good or bad cops, but we're talking about systems here. We're talking about systems change. We're talking about reallocating funds to things that are going to support people in terms of the social safety net. And so for me to see people sort of like pull back a little bit, when what this whole COVID crisis should have made us all realize that there are no social safety nets. There are none, not even for you. Like, there has been a fundamental failure on many levels. And if we're going to go with the fact that you are really upset about that, and there's under this cover of Black Lives Matter, then you should be thinking through what are some of the solutions. And it's not necessarily going to be the 8.1 that has been offered up. Because that's very discreet, right? It's very discreet, and it's actually just about controlling police behavior. Nothing about culture change.
And that is already inherently in their rule books. This kind of behavior is not acceptable. But I think that is going to be the issue, right? It's about when you're done protesting and when it comes to, do you really want systemic change? Because that's what you're really protesting, right? And who's going to want systemic change is mostly going to be Black people. Right? Because they understand what's at stake here.
They're the ones who the system is crushing.
Right. And if you notice all the corporate speeches and statements and whatever the case may be, they're not talking about systemic change, right? They're just saying, be nice to the Black people you know. We are nice to the Black people we know. But at the end of the day, every one of those corporate statements, somebody is coming out, well, we work for you and you weren't nice. And we were Black and you weren't nice to us. So don't know what you're really talking about.
I got to tell you, right? I was going to say, I got to tell you. I was convinced when I got up Monday morning that I had fallen down the stairs and was in a coma and woke up and nobody told me. Because the number of text messages I got from my white friends asking me if I was all right. I'm like, what happened? I was like, and I'm getting another email. I get another text. Hey, just let me know if there's anything I can do. I'm like, what happened? And then I'm looking up. I get another text message from somebody. I just want you to know I'm here for you. I'm like, did something happen and nobody told me? I'm for real. I was like, what is? And then I'm like, oh, this is George Floyd. I'm like, people are calling me directly.
You are their George Floyd. You are their.
I'm all right. And I'm like, I'm good. Are you all right? And so as this was going on, as I was listening to people, and I'm getting all these messages from people I haven't heard from in years, just wanted you to know that I've always been, always been on your side. I'm like, I don't know how to respond to this. But I started thinking about this. I'm like, look, the president has deployed the military to point its guns at you too. Are you all right?
Exactly. Oh my gosh, that is what I say back. I said, listen, I know that you want this to be about us and me, but this is about all of us. Your structure is crumbling. Do you know that?
Are you all right? Because I was like, what are you looking at me like? I said, we go through this all the time. Mm-hmm. I was like, I don't remember you asking me if I was all right when they left Michael Brown hanging out in the street for 4 hours.
Right. This does feel different, though, doesn't it?
It feels completely different, and that's the whole point, is that it does feel different, the reason why it feels different is because it's not about Michael Brown and it's not about us. It's being directed at us, but it's really not completely about us. And you'll find out, we'll know who's about it and who's not about it when you start realizing, when things start to get taken away, when it's like, okay, when you start reallocating You ask people what reallocation really looks like. It's about losing some stuff. What are you willing to actually give up? What are you willing to actually sacrifice in terms of gain, right? In terms of if your gain is not clearly financial, are you still in the game? Are you still willing to be part of this? I mean, it's like when we were talking about, when people say Black Lives Matter, are they talking about police or are they talking about hiring? Because when I think about Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about the whole thing. So
Right.
you're talking about systems and you're talking about CEOs, and I ask the question when it comes to corporate and business all the time: are you grooming me to replace you? Because if you're not, we have nothing to talk about. We have nothing to talk, because essentially what you're saying is that I will always have at least one step beneath you. Are you grooming me to have a job that you think should go to you? Are you willing to step away? It's like we were talking about YA earlier, the number of white writers who are just absolutely upset at the fact that the culture is moving. Now you're not allowed to write about black people in any way that you want. Now the industry wants black people to write about black people, and they're like, that's discrimination. Are you willing to open up a space that doesn't include you?
Are you open, Tennis Channel, are you willing to have a table just with black commentators talking?
No, God, no, right?
But let's be real about it, right? We have someone who can talk about Monfils' game without any of the coded language that we have to hear when we talk about it.
Would they even accept training, though? Would they even accept training to be like, you see these things that you are saying? And John McEnroe, you kind of have to do some research before you get on the air.
Well, I didn't watch the match, and I think that he's ranked somewhere between 1 and 75. You know, I mean, and I like John. I actually think that John, at some level, serves a great purpose. In that the purpose that he served was that he was a celebrity, he's a star, he brings eyeballs to the sport. But then when it comes to actually people who watch the sport, and whether it's him or I can't be talking about this, we all work at the same company, but when you're watching the stuff, they so easily slip into all of those same cliches. It's like, okay, they're talking about Monfils. We're going to go to work ethic in 3, 2, 1, and it's like it's always the same thing. And it goes back to the point, I think, Janina, that you were making earlier about the culture. No, I think it was in Dream when you were saying that this is something that they believe that they own. Right? They own what work ethic in tennis looks like. They own what demeanor looks like. They own what the culture of a successful male tennis player is supposed to look like. How they get to define it, only they can define it. That's right, and only they can define it. Now, Serena sort of messed that up because Serena and Venus were so damn good, they got to define what a successful tennis player looked like on the WTA side. But because you've never had that on the men's side, the Monfises of the world and everybody else who doesn't quite follow exactly what the stern, stoic tennis player, which is kind of ironic watching John McEnroe say these things. But, all of that sort of culture, that sort of cultural demeanor, they get to control that. So every time they're talking about someone like Monfils or whomever, and on the flip side is they talk about guys who are less successful but have the right demeanor and talk about them as if they're more professional. I mean, because if you're really going to talk about someone like Monfils, he's had a phenomenal last 3 seasons. He's been great. He's played really, really, really well. And you look at him, I think he's 9th in the world now. He's been between 7 and 14 for the past few years. He really has been an outstanding player.
But
that's Elena Svitolina.
They like to say, oh, she's dating Svitolina, and she's such a hard worker, and this is rubbing off on Monfils.
Exactly.
Like,
if we're actually keeping it real, I mean, if you really want to keep it real, Svitolina's the one whose game falls apart the minute she gets to a semifinal.
Right.
I mean, she doesn't just fall. She gets her ass kicked when she gets to a semifinal. It's like, is this the same player? I mean, she gets out there, and you can see the nerves. I think those
5
two
matches, 5.5 matches. That's it.
Exactly. I think the two of them are great for each other. Right?
I have maybe going back to the point where Andreen made that she doesn't know whether a black male player could get into this space. But I do wonder if perhaps we need to ask other question. It's not just being successful on the court, right? But what about the other apparatus behind the scene? Because
I
a
think
tennis
that's it.
player is not an individual, right?
Yep.
Would this space allow for a black male player? Because when there have been any inkling of there being a black male player, they have quickly tried to shut him down or box him in a sort of a. I'm thinking Nick, who has potential, some maybe not be like gold kind of potential, but potential to compete then, but injuries, etc. But is the sport um as a person of color, because Nick isn't black, but a male of color, but does the sport allow for that sort of space? Can because Taylor Townsend brought out something I think we don't. It's the microaggression that gets to you every day. Like how do they
Well,
handle, even if they're capable and they're talented to play and win, can
yeah,
they
I think
deal
the
with the microaggression, the mental aspect of it every day?
yeah, I think the hardest thing that people don't recognize when they're watching tennis is one, the amount of emotional energy you have to bring in a very short span. And it's very similar. It's very similar in some ways to baseball, in that in a week's time, non-major, especially at a 500 tournament or even not 1,000, some thousands, but you're playing every day. By the time you get to that second week, you're playing every day. Or if you're playing one of those 1 week tournaments, it's an everyday thing. And so there's not a lot of time to relax, regroup, rethink. At the very least, you're getting 1 day. It's not like basketball where you may have a game on Friday. Your next game's not until Wednesday. So it's really difficult to be able to maintain a certain emotional level. And I think you're right. I think that the real question that I'm really looking forward to seeing it one day, to see what would it be like to have the best tennis player in the world be a black male, and what would we be asking from that person? I'm thinking, now that you bring it up, Reels, I'm thinking, who is the last individual sport black male who was unapologetically black at the same time? Ali? I mean, Tiger did a whole lot of accommodation, right? We know Tiger just ran from being black. Who was the last black male who was the best in the world at what they did in an individual sport who identified seriously as black?
It has to be boxing. It has to.
It's got to be. It's got to be boxing. It's got to be Ali
Yeah.
or Tyson, and you didn't want that, right?
Yeah.
So what does that actually look like? You've seen it plenty of times in team sports, but the closest thing you get is a LeBron or a Jordan, because they are so prominent in the culture off the court. Sometimes they feel like individuals.
Yeah.
But in individual sport, I think it's easy to eliminate them, right? Because I'm thinking about a winter sport, Shawnee Davis. He did
in speed skating, yeah.
in speed skating. He was definitely the best middle distance skater
Yep.
in the world for like 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
I mean, if not even more than that, but for 2 Olympics, basically, he dominated.
He dominated, yeah.
He dominated, but there was the constant microaggression. He's not part of the group. Boo,
That's right.
Yellow skating out there. He can't.
Oh yeah, and track and field. Sorry.
And track and field.
Yeah,
I
track
think,
and field.
Yeah, Usain and things like that. But yeah, but it's different.
But
yeah.
they're not allowed to occupy a political space, right?
That's right.
They quickly put that in a box.
Yeah, and Bolt's not American.
Right.
So,
Sure.
So I mean, I think okay. I see what Janina and Andrina is saying. I see you're right. It might not be possible. I mean, that might not be possible. Like you, Howard, I am looking forward to see what that looks like.
I just want to see. Yeah, I just want to.
He
see
would have my support for sure, but
But
I
you
would
see,
really like to see.
This is
what
the
that
Black
looks-
Lives Matter theme, right? Does Black Lives Matter if we can if this space can accommodate black people really in their full blackness? We've shown that it couldn't accommodate the women in their full blackness. And there's some people attempting to do it now. We'll see what that looks like. That bodes well for the future, right? But we've already seen hints of some conflict. We've seen how people turn quickly against Coco at certain moments, and we've seen them do it against Naomi. So we're in a respite. We're in a break period. We'll have to see what it looks like.
That's right. That's right. And what's actually going to be real interesting too is that there was one player who you sort of saw who was really starting to move interestingly in that direction, and it was somebody who I had no time for, and we did not get along and have never gotten along. It was Sloane Stephens, and then she stopped winning.
Yeah.
I mean, when Sloane Stephens was walking in with a black coach and Josie Altidore, and I was like, oh, that's sort of interesting. And considering that, it was, you weren't quite sure where she was on that. I still say that 2017? I think it was either 2017 or 2018 U.S. Open semifinal weekend where you had 3 black women in
Amazing.
And there was one who said nothing, Venus, but she got the free pass because she was Venus.
She never says anything, right? She never says anything in press conference.
There was 2, Madison Keys, who was like, yeah, I'm not really proud of this moment. And then there was, even though, yes, I was inspired by Venus when I was a little kid. And then there was Sloane Stephens, who was like, absolutely, I'm here because I'm black. I was like, oh, am I in an alternate universe? But
I just think that they have to. I think for some athletes and athletes of color, particularly when you're in a white space, just in general, I always think, even though, you might not want to acknowledge your blackness or your heritage, etc., someone will remind you. You will be reminded. So yeah. I know this, I think they have to come to that moment, that come to Jesus moment on their own, where they stick in and then they go do the reading, because I'm sure that may have happened for Colin as well, right? That for Kaepernick, he was running around thinking, he is just like one of the boys, and then there is that moment, right, where someone is just like, your hair don't look so right. You tan too well, and then it changes the whole. He realized one thing is not like the other.
Yeah.
But
and you constantly get reminded of it.
Yes. So Howard, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. It is a Sunday, and I don't know if you're where you are. You're under quarantine. I'm not so sure whether in New York City whether I still have quarantine. So I have to try to not.
Well, at least you're in New York. You got your curfew lifted, right?
Curfew. Well, I'm not so sure with this. That might be a trick from the mayor. Like police running around.
That's it. Hey, exactly. Let's set a trap so we can watch them get their asses kicked again.
Exactly. We're gonna attempt the purge out here. Those movies make a big hit, and I always think
oh God.
It's just like someone is putting these movies out because they believe and they want this thing to happen. So the purge, I don't want to be part of the purge. I want to live, just to see Naomi grab some old wigs out here. But so thank you very much for coming on. I think.
No, it's my pleasure. This has been great.
Yes, this is gonna be.
Howard, anything else coming up for you? Any books? Anything?
Let's see. What am I doing?
But you're under quarantine, Howard, so you should be writing. I'm just saying.
I tell people all the time. I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I gotta tell you, my life hasn't really changed that much outside of like not going outside that much and not getting on an airplane. I'm like, I'm sitting in the same spot I usually sit in. Okay, I've gotten gas once since February.
Once.
Wow.
Once. But everything else, no. I'm working on a biography of Rickey Henderson, which has been a lot of fun. Do a little baseball bio. I have been approached on a couple of different times to write a tennis book.
Ooh.
And I have completely resisted it.
Do you want us to ask our audience to give you some suggestions of a book they'd
What would you exactly, if there was a tennis book out there, what did you want to read? I would love that because
I have one. It is. Do you think how do you think tennis would have changed had the Black Tennis Player Association maintained itself, that tennis wasn't integrated? Though people don't want to think it became integrated, that tennis integrated as did baseball. What would have been the face of tennis if tennis players, if we kept the black tennis circuit continued?
I talked to Art about this, and Art was telling me, Art was like, he's like, why it is, because I love Art. You get a black man in his 70s, he has opinions, and he was like, well, why we have open tennis, right? I'm like, why? He's like, because, man, these whiteys didn't want us in their private clubs. Why you think we got big stadiums now? He's like, the whole thing was going to get integrated to the point where, you know, the last thing they wanted was for tennis to become a mainstream sport. And if tennis became that much of a mainstream sport, then you had to get into their clubs. And that's why you start building these big old multi-purpose stadiums and stuff, or tennis stadiums, so you could maintain the country club private nature of the game while still making money. I'm like, damn, Art.
That's smart. That's smart, though, because I think that was the tension in golf, wasn't it?
And that was the tension. He goes, why do you think they left Forest Hills? They didn't leave Forest Hills because the grounds couldn't accommodate it at the time. They left Forest Hills because, you know, it was time. They were like, it was the game. You know, and I didn't realize this, right? The number of private clubs, like they still play at these private clubs in Philadelphia. They still play at these gorgeous. If you have been like to the Tennis Hall of Fame, I mean, okay, it's $96 an hour to play there.
Oh,
but,
no.
But it is the only public tennis court in the country that's grass.
Wow, so you really have to pay to get there.
So you got to, exactly, right? So whenever I'm in Newport, I'm like, all right, I'll do it. I was like, all right, I'll do it. Because I want to play on, I never played on grass before, so I went and did it. But at $96 an hour, I was like, I'll see you in about 5 years.
One last question, Howard, and we can wrap up so you can finally go. Just question: do you think that because of this moment, and you see the black players or players of color are coming together, do you think that they should make some much more solidified this movement or this cooperation and create a union of thought and then push for more of the things that they want to see on tour, which would eventually, of course, will benefit everybody else, right? Because once black people move the needle and say we want this, it changes the trajectory for everybody else, right? Public education in America, etc.
Yeah, I tend to think the first question is what do they want? I mean, because if you start looking at the best, you know, the best of the best players who are old enough to vote, you know, you're looking at guys, you know, Venus and Serena, and they're on the other side of it. I always worry about Francis because he's in the ATP and the USTA men. I mean, I'm waiting to see when he's 40 what his memoir is going to read like, being around those guys, because it's not necessarily sort of an environment where do you feel like you're in a place where you can ask for things. I mean, Tiafoe is, what is he, 33 in the world or 34? No, he's in the mid 30s right now, somewhere in there. So I think that I would prefer it stay quiet for now. I hope that they are networking behind the scenes, and I hope they're creating something where they all pay it forward to each other.
Yeah.
Where they start looking, because it is interesting. When I was in high school, you know, there was Mal Washington, and then there was no longer Mal Washington, and then that was it until you started to see Tsonga in Monfils, and I was like, oh, okay.
James,
so
you saw James.
And James Blake, absolutely. And then you see James Blake, and then I remember one time when I saw James Blake, I was like, where'd he come from, right? I mean, so it's like one of those things where you're hoping that chain, these guys take care of each other, they start building, and so it's interesting to see, you know, to see, you know, Shonda Rubin on the air. You know, It's interesting to see, you know, like even in that video, I was like, oh, look, Zeta Garrison. Oh, Lori McNeil. Oh, you know, there's a reunion, people, right? Exactly.
And those people have a wealth of knowledge that I think they should be accessing.
Exactly. They got something to offer, 100%.
Well, you know
100%.
What? Tiafoe is 81 in the world.
Is he really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, shit.
I wonder if they kept counting for him and not for Nole, right? if they were like dropping out points.
Damn, Francis is 80.
Everyone's frozen.
He had a rough patch last year.
Everyone's frozen. Yeah, that's his
Everyone's
rank.
frozen, yeah.
So that is rank 81. His career high was 29.
It was 29. That's what I was just sort of remembering him, because I remember thinking about what that Olympic cut was going to be. I thought he was inside of top 50.
Yeah.
And
so, you know, everybody gets the do-over now.
You get the do-over. 2001, boo. 2001. You're going to carry that flag for America.
Well, the one thing I'm actually happy about right now, when we were talking about sort of those
2021,
stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those stereotypes, is that Francis hasn't gotten socked with that yet, that underachiever label yet.
No.
He hasn't gotten it. And you know who's really interesting, who hasn't gotten it, even though he deserves it, and instead they've moved him into he's the greatest doubles player in the world, which I don't know where that came from, is Jack Sock.
Okay.
If you watch Tennis Channel, they constantly refer to him as the greatest doubles player in the world.
Yeah, I know. I felt
Not
like
that
they
valid.
got. I felt like they got like a
that's
memo
the moment
about
for me
that.
to end, so that I don't get in trouble. I don't get you in
Right?
trouble.
There we go. We'll
So,
leave that be.
we just want to say that it's a lie. That is a lie straight from hell.
One, it's not
we
true.
will-
No, it's not true, but it's also really weird because there was a certain period in time when that was almost like a script. I was like, where did this come from?
Exactly. I'm like, who put that in there? I'm like, to the point where when I was watching Laver Cup once, I had to go look at the doubles rankings. I'm like, did I miss something? Because
because the truth of the matter, because how are you gonna really, what else? Because I think because Jack Sock has fallen off so low that Vasek Pospisil is winning singles matches, and Jack Sock can't even do that.
Ranked 389
Exactly.
Singles, right?
in singles
so
and 126 in doubles. So I'm not sure how he's the best double player in the world.
But you have to say something, you have to say something in order to pull him into the conversation, right? Because he shouldn't be anywhere near a tennis court. He's not even in the shape.
You could just say they're American players. I don't need you to blow smoke up my bum. You know what I mean? You could just say American tennis players. You don't have to create a whole narrative.
Because they bypass a whole bunch of people, right? Scoville Jenkins, the other players, I'm sure, who are players of color, not necessarily from black players who probably should have been there. Mackenzie, Malcolm, is it Malcolm? Mackenzie should be there.
I mean, how are you going to call him the best doubles player in the world when Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal are actually playing tennis? If they played doubles, they'd be the best doubles players in the world because they're both excellent doubles players. Both of them are phenomenal doubles players.
Yeah,
well,
but you got to.
And did the Bryant brothers really retire already? I thought they were still playing.
Right.
But,
it is interesting, right? Like it is. It's just. But once again, I mean, that's the thing. I think I'm looking forward to a couple of things, and then I will let you all go. I'm looking forward to just seeing if you do get that ATP WTA sort of merger, which is what it should be, and that they actually do try to defend each other and sort of recognize. I mean, I think that the when I covered whatever Wimbledon I was at, I can't remember which year it was, but you could really see the fractures in there when Gilles Simon did his thing and he was carrying water for all the men about how much deep down they really don't even want the women there. I'm hoping that this shutdown sort of reminds them that your sport is the only sport in the world really where you can actually achieve something in terms of gender that the other sports can't do, right? I mean, you actually have something here. Like when I go to a major, I'm going to see everybody.
Yep.
And you've got something here that nobody else has. Don't mess it up. It's something really valuable.
Well,
That's a good point.
I think it's a very good point, and I think it's a great way to end. I believe in those possibilities. I love the joint tournament. I love going to a tournament and being able to like, oh, I want to see women do this. Okay, let me go see the men's match. Let me go. I like to see that. That's a nice it's a nice gift. Not to say that I don't. I mean, I follow the ATP and I enjoy that as well. I enjoy either of them, but it is nice when you can pay your money and go and get a smorgasbord. So
there's no other ticket in sports where you get more value than a grounds pass in the first week of a major.
Oh, it's so
you get. I mean, name me another sport where you get that much talent. Maybe going to the Olympics for a day. That might be.
Yeah, that might be it. But then
right?
But then you have to travel all over the place to go because the swimming isn't happening anywhere near the gymnastics, right?
Exactly. Right?
You gotta travel across. You want to do that canoe bit. You gotta go up in the mountains for that. So.
Oh yeah, like when I was in Vancouver, I was on sliding sports. So I had to go to Whistler. So I was 2 hours north of Vancouver because I had skiing, I had luge, and I had bobsled. And then when I wanted to come in to go do speed skating and stuff, where I saw Shani Davis, you had to come into Vancouver. So that was 2.5 hours. So you had to do that on different days. You couldn't do it in the same day.
Yeah.
Never mind being on the same grounds.
Get me a Biathlon Connect, and I will be so happy, so I can go watch Biathlon first, and I'll be so happy. But let's not keep each other here. Thank you, folks, we're back, folks. We're glad that we're able to put out another exciting episode for you. Let's thank Howard. You can hit him up on Twitter. If I'm not mistaken, it's at HBryant42.
That is me.
Okay. And it's Bryant with a T. And you can find us where you want. You can, send crazy DMs if you want to and tell us how we're horrible, but we know you really love us. And don't forget, if you don't want to give us credit, give us the check. So thank you, Howard, for being here again.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. See y'all.
Bye.
Bye. And so we also don't have to put out a Black Lives Matter statement because we're all black and we know we're matter and we know. So.
Real, I love you. Good night.
Good night.